So after a couple of minutes, the hypervisor should be completed with the setup. Here with a 250 gig partition and this AMD dual core 48050EM, it took about 2 minutes for it to complete the setup, so it shouldn't take very long. And as we mentioned, the app queue partition, when it's formatted, is a good telltale sign if you don't have console access. Here it's now populated with the various space information from the partition. So at this point you can use the getImage command in the boot menu to copy over the kernel image that the hypervisor will boot from. However, we're going to use tftp, so tftp has a couple of extra steps, mainly because tftp normally uses port 69, it's a UDP protocol. However, it only uses that for control information, so when we go transfer files back to and from the hypervisor using tftp, it actually needs the upper level UDP ports open. This is from 1024 to 65535. For security purposes, these are not widely open on the hypervisor. You're going to have to open those ports for your tftp server. So to do that, we will navigate to the firewall menu, and we'll create a zone specifically for the tftp server. So here right now by default we just have a single zone which covers all networks. A zone is a selection of IP addresses and network ranges that can be used to create various different firewall rules for them. So if you have a set of IP addresses that are specific to a particular group of machines or a grouping that you want to put together, basically a zone, you can use the zone command to create these and group them together. Makes it so that you don't have to have as many firewall rules configured. You can configure blocks, and then the system itself will go ahead and configure those for you. So we're going to call this zone tftp server. It's in VLAN 150, and the IP address for our tftp server is 10.35.35.141, and we use cedar mask of 32 because it's a single host. The zone command, like a lot of firewall commands, will just continually prompt you for additional IPs to make data entry easier. So when you're done entering IPs, just hit enter and it will complete. So we run list. Now you can see that we've got the tftp server set up on VLAN 150 and its IP is 10.35.35.141. So the next thing we need to do is create an application. The application rule is basically an application profile. Allows the hypervisor to know exactly what ports and protocols are covered by this particular rule. There are a number set up already, and we're going to create a new one to cover the upper level of TFTP ports, or UDP ports. So we're going to call this UDP MISC. It will ask you for some state information. It does this by default, but it's not necessary for the UDP protocol. We're going to say no to TCP and ICMP. Say yes to UDP, and it's going to ask you for a port range. If you just want to use one port, and just use the same port for start and finish, but here we got a large port range, so we're going to use 1024 for the start and 65535 for the end. And finally, I'll ask you what the port direction is. This is basically whether it's a source or destination type rule, or if it's both. So for this particular instance, we're just using it for an import rule, so it's just going to be the destination IP. Once again, just like the zone command, it's going to prompt you for additional ports, so when you're ready, just hit enter, and it'll drop you back to the prompt. You can run list, and now you can see that we have our protocol set up as an application. So the next thing we need to do is create a rule. So we'll create a filter. We're going to list rules here, and you see we're going to use the input firewall. So we're going to add it, and it's an inbound rule. We're creating it after rule number 3. We're going to have traffic coming from the TFTP server, and it's going to go into our IP address on the hypervisor, but for just simplicity's sakes, we're going to use all. And then finally, it asks you for the app profile. We're going to use UDP MISC. We don't really care about the rate limiting. We want the filter action to be allow. And lo and behold, we now have our TFTP rule. So what we've done here is we created the source zone called TFTP server, and we're using the destination zone as all, so it's just going to be any IP address that's configured on the hypervisor. Our application is UDP MISC, so it's covering the UDP protocol from ports 1024 through 65535, and our action is allow. So now we should be able to go to the boot menu, use the getImage command. Now getImage allows you to install a bootable KaOS enabled Linux kernel into one of two slots. The idea with having two slots is that you can alternate back and forth with a good working image and an upgrade image. Here in the future we'll extend the number of slots, but for now it's just two. So by default we should start with slot number 1. We'll give it the tftp URL and the IP address of the tftp server, and we've called the file hvimage.0.0. This is just the BZ image from the SDK that we've built. We'll just hit enter, and we'll go ahead and start transferring that. Now once it's downloaded, it instantly installs it into that slot, so within about a second or so after it's prompted you with this, it's actually already installed it and it's ready to boot. So just for safety reasons, let's give it an extra second or two, and then you can actually reboot the hypervisor. So at this point, once we reboot the hypervisor, we're going to go through to the next video and show you how to set up some basic virtualization stuff.